I'm not going to try to be the veterinarian, so most of my presentation will focus a little bit more on the nutritional aspects of lameness issues. Really given, I think, a very directed target for this presentation, and that's to look at some of the clinical diagnostic techniques that could be used in a clinical setting for identifying lameness issues. I'm going to really try to narrow the topic down for those of you that might not know me. My background, I've worked in the bone area most all of my career, and actually graduate school was involved with doing a lot of mechanical testing of bone. We're not going to go there today, so we'll stay away from that. Would like to acknowledge some of my co-workers that have contributed. What I have taken as part of the paper is a lot of the research projects that we've done over the years, different experiments, and tried to pull data from those experiments just to try to put together kind of a message for the presentation today. The whole bone area, think about my career and the length of time that that's been, we've made a lot of progress. I found this definition of bone from some 4-H youth one time. They were asked to define bone, and that's what you hitch muscle to. That was their definition of bone. One of my co-workers that I did a sabbatical with, Nigel Loveridge, gave a presentation in '99 at an animal science symposium. He titled the presentation, go back and look at that, but he titled the presentation, "Bone is More Than a Stick." At that time in '99, we did not understand some of the things that we know today about bone and what bone does with homeostatic regulation of issues within the body. We now know that bone actually functions more like an endocrine gland. Secretes at least 2 major systemic hormones, one being the FGF23 that's very involved with phosphorus regulation. The other is the uncalcified osteocalcin that actually feeds back and helps to regulate the body's insulin levels. So we'll not get into those topics, but just to point out that there's been a lot of progress that's been made in our understanding of bone and the roles that bone play within the body and some of the signaling mechanisms, homeostatic mechanisms that are involved with that. Those are very difficult tools to use for clinical diagnosis. So, Darren, I think this is some of your data that was published in a news release, but just describes as he's just gone through some of the recent case increases that have occurred with diagnostic cases submitted. I think most all of this was to the Iowa State labs. The issue, even though we've studied bone, we understand a lot about bone, now more than we did 40, 50, 60 years ago. There's still a lot that we do not know, and why, if we know all of this about bone, why are we having such an increase in the number of cases? Pigs have been around, barring the housing, the facilities that they've been in, how we've fed the pigs, have been around more than just this recent outbreak with the vitamin D deficiency. And I think Darren would agree with me. I don't think we have a clue as to what all contributed to that, but it certainly has heightened the interest in this whole area. So my focus today, dealing with the skeletal issue, if we want to know what the problem is, what's contributing to the lameness, it's certainly 2 major categories, and Darren mentioned the osteochondrosis that would occur, and those are certainly lesions that you see in a lot of pigs, and Dr. Carlson has worked a lot in that area, contributed a lot. My focus has historically been in more the bone mineral part of it, the calcium and phosphorus, that aspect of mineral nutrition. So my talk today will focus only on this part. It's not to say that this part is not important, okay? But I'll focus more on the mineral part of it. Dr. Madsen mentioned the ribs and using the ribs and the rubbery rib and snapping the rib. I might go from a diagnostic standpoint 1 step prior to that and say, you know, from a diagnostic standpoint, if you want to identify whether you have calcium or phosphorus issues in the herd, do a slaughter check, go to a slaughter plant and just simply look for not necessarily the rachitic rosei, but calloused ribs. These are actually a callus that would form a wound healing response probably 6 to 8 weeks before that animal was slaughtered. For that callus to be mineralized and the bead to form like that, it had to be at least that long ago. More recent breaks in the ribs have occurred in these because you still see the hemorrhaged tissue. You don't need the rib to walk off the truck and go through the slaughter plant. Certainly, I'm not advocating that we feed our animals, we manage our nutrition programs so that a small incidence of the pigs would have either calloused or beaded ribs. But if you want to know that whether or not you're hitting the bottom end of that, do a slaughter check, look and just evaluate the rib cages looking for the calloused ribs. Certainly if the animal is not able to walk off the truck, it has to be euthanized, or maybe damage occurs right at death of the animal, and you get some hemorrhaging that might occur in the hams. The bone has to be strong enough now to support the animal through the fabrication process within the slaughter pen. Get the animal off the truck, onto the truck, off the truck, and through fabrication. Focus on the mineral part of it now, as far as lameness is concerned. This is a graph that is actually in a book chapter in the swine nutrition textbook. Darren mentioned the wet bone, dry bone. I'll just let it be known right up front. I have a strong bias against measuring bone ash on a wet basis, because on a wet basis, about 25% of the bone would be ash, about 20% protein, and the fat and water portions can vary. We actually have data, not present today, where with dietary treatments we're changing the fat content of bone. As animals age, the fat content of bone changes as a function of age, the marrow part of the bone. So I think we need to eliminate the water and fat. On a dry fat-free basis, about 56% of the bone would be ash or the inorganic material, 44% organic. Now these are very hard numbers, and just to make a table come out exactly, the calcium and phosphorus, I would expect hydroxyapatite, calcium and phosphorus would be about 39% calcium, 18% phosphorus, in a 2-to-1 ratio in bone. Now we do feed diets in a different ratio. I have students in my class actually back calculate what that ratio should be, assuming a certain retention in soft tissue versus bone. You'll come out in the whole body at about a 1.7-to-1 calcium to phosphorus ratio. Take into consideration the availability in our plant ingredients, you will arrive on a calculated basis really quick at this 1.1 to 1.2 calcium to phosphorus ratio. Bone ash, 2-to-1 ratio of calcium to phosphorus. If we add the oxygens and the hydroxyapatite and the phosphate group, bone would be approximately 94% calcium hydroxyapatite. That would leave about 7% of the bone ash that would be composed of sodium, potassium, and some of the trace elements. Magnesium would also be present within the bone. Okay. Just real quick, the calcium to phosphorus ratio as a percentage of the ash, if it's expressed as a dry fat-free ash, I've not seen any evidence that that really changes. You have these numbers that will float around. I've reviewed papers for the journal. You'll find numbers that differ from that are actually published. Do some calculations and calculate how much it would take of something like calcium oxide in order to change the calcium to phosphorus ratio. You'd be surprised how much calcium oxide you would have to add. That's not biological, it's not physiological. I would maintain that when you see values, published values that differ from this, there's probably an analytical problem in the lab more than there is a biological change in something that would change how much calcium or phosphate would be deposited in bone. Very difficult to move those numbers. Okay, Darren mentioned the growth, modeling, and remodeling that occurs. I'll not spend more time, but bone is a very dynamic tissue, constantly turning over in different envelopes in the bone. How that process occurs and what we do from a dietary standpoint to either enhance or suppress that process will influence not only the amount of mineral that gets deposited, but also will influence the strength properties of the bone. Real quick, kind of a summary table of, at this point, of different methods that we have available to really assess skeletal tissues and the integrity of that. And I've just grouped those into 3 major categories. Methods that would involve histology, histological methods, methods that would involve some type of gravimetric determination of the amount of ash material that's there. And I've included DEXA, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. And then the mechanical test. Both the gravimetric measures, histology, and mechanical test require terminal assessment of the animal, determination of the animal to collect the tissue. DEXA allows us the opportunity to scan the animal, do a non-invasive assessment of the animal. From that standpoint, I think it offers us a great tool. There is a problem now with the histology and mechanical test, and today, from a diagnostic standpoint, I'm going to say we'll focus strictly on the gravimetric determinations, even though, I mentioned earlier, PhD work, I dealt with methods to determine bone strength and how to measure that. The ash content of the bone is not equivalent to the strength properties. You can change ash content over narrow range. You can change strength properties independent of the ash content. We can have several hours of discussion on that if you want to do that, but we'll not really take that one on much today. The real pitfall with histology and mechanical tests, even though I think both of these offer more fundamental information about the bone, the real pitfall with those is this little factor called time, the turnaround time. So if you have pigs in a major operation, you need to get results back, you need to make a decision, solve a problem. You don't have time to wait for, if it's me, to get the mechanical test done, or for Kathy to get the histology done. And we both work very hard, okay? It's not the issue of you're not working. Those techniques, those procedures require time in the lab to process those through. Gravimetric tests can be fairly rapid. If done correctly, they should be fairly accurate, but there's still this issue of what that's actually predicted. I've gained an interest over the years, had the opportunity to work with the DEXA machine. The technology for that was actually developed on the Madison campus, and we've actually done scans on pigs up to about 120 kilograms. So it's used typically for humans in screening for osteoporosis. Our primary interest in that, or my interest over the long run, has been using that as a technique to determine calcium and phosphorus retention or efficiency of calcium and phosphorus use from a research standpoint. Okay, early models of DEXA, early prototypes that were out were used clinically, were not very accurate. We've actually been involved in helping to develop the algorithms for the Prodigy model, and by dissection. So we've dissected out entire pigs, every bone within the pig, compared to different scan modes that we would use for different sizes of pigs. We can show that the DEXA actually gives a very accurate prediction of the grams of ash that would be in the whole pig. So DEXA bone mineral content is essentially equal to, the coefficient is 1.001 times the ash content. That would equal the bone mineral content from DEXA, at least using the Prodigy model. So we've been able to show accuracy within that. And for the work that we're doing with calcium phosphorus retention, accuracy becomes an important feature of that. Now we've used DEXA to study because we can non-invasively scan the whole pig or the same pig at multiple time points. We've used that to look at kind of a depletion-repletion experiments, looking at whether or not the animal has the ability to recover from a period of a calcium and phosphorus deficiency. So we fed pigs at 150% of the calcium phosphorus requirements, or at 70% for a 4-week time period. And then the pigs that have been fed diets that were deficient were actually fed then diets during a 6-week recovery period at 150% of the requirement. So in kind of a crossover design, we followed pigs and did DEXA scans on the same pigs. These are quick results now from this study. And there's a couple of points now related to the ash that I want to try to make with this. After a 4-week time period, pigs that have been fed diets with 70% of calcium phosphorus requirements had a 66% lower bone mineral content or ash content in the whole body. Okay? 66% reduction. I would have assumed, give them about 2 weeks, the skeleton would just soak up the calcium and phosphorus, improve the efficiency, and recover that period of deficiency within about a 2-week time period. The pigs often, in my case, at least in Wisconsin, they don't read the book. If you look at the two blue lines, when these deficient pigs were placed on a diet that was adequate or more than adequate in calcium and phosphorus, those two lines are parallel. Okay? There was no evidence over a 6-week time period that the animal had actually recovered any bone mineral content. Yes, they were deposited in bone, but at the same rate that they were earlier. Okay, so there was no catch-up or recovery response occurring. The other thing I would point out here is over this time period, they actually increased, what is it, about 3 to 4-fold? So about a 3 to 4-fold increase. If they were going to recover, there was ample opportunity for them to do that during that time period. Now, this is the whole body. And I realized that from a diagnostic standpoint, other than shipping animals into a lab or to a location somewhere that has the DEXA instrument, you're probably not going to use that on the farm. So we've taken the DEXA instrument one step further and asked, well, can we measure, can we scan a single bone that might be collected at the slaughter plant and shipped to some location that had a DEXA machine, and the obvious bone to collect was actually the front foot. So we've done DEXA scans on the front foot and actually found that the orientation, the way we laid the foot on the table affected the accuracy. And we found that if we had the toes of the foot facing to the head of the table, or what we called north, the dew claws down, that was the more accurate position if the foot was placed on 2 rice bags to just act as a carbon background for the scan. So we can scan those, and again, compared to dissected bone, every bone in the foot was dissected just to confirm the accuracy. The coefficient, if you're not able to read that from the back, it's 0.9. I have to get closer here. 988. So it's essentially 1. So the coefficient is high, so we can scan the foot. The turnaround time on that is fairly fast. So we could scan probably a couple of 100 pig feet in a day if we really just turn the crank on that. The next day, get the analysis out, have the results back from that to tell you what the ash content in the whole foot would be. Now, does the whole foot reflect the whole pig? We don't feed the foot, we feed the whole pig, right? So if we want to know something about use of bone ash, so DEXA is reflecting ash, takes time to dissect. You know, if you work with a single bone, multiple bones out of the foot, it would be important to know how the ash content responded then to different nutrient inputs. So relative to nutrient input, age of the animal, bone or health status, how the animal responds. If it's a real steep response, we're probably able to identify a threshold. If that response is more curvilinear, we have a difficult time saying at what point do we go to before we begin to predict lameness and accurately predict the lameness issues in the animal. So let's look at some of the variables. Actually, part of my PhD work, I looked at actually 8 different bones shown here: the femur, humerus, metacarpal, metatarsal, rib, and vertebra at 2, 4, 6, and 8 months of age in pigs that were fed diets with either 0.4 calcium and phosphorus, or 0.8. So a wide range of difference in calcium phosphorus levels over the growing finishing period. And the open bars on the bottom would be the low calcium phosphorus. The upper solid bars would be the high calcium phosphorus level. Now the main take-home message from this slide, and I realize the bars are kind of small from the back, but each bone responds differently as a function of age to dietary calcium and phosphorus levels. In other words, all the bones in the body are not growing and not being deposited, minerals not being deposited at the same rate within a bone. The femur seems to be quite responsive. At the higher calcium and phosphorus levels, between 6 and 8 months, tends to level off a bit. Several of the bones, the humerus, metacarpal, metatarsal, the upper levels are beginning to level off. The ribs, they actually take a dip at between 2 and 4 months of age. They have a lower ash content if they're on a deficient level. So the bone that you select for sampling makes a difference in whether or not you can, or what ash content, what the ash value would actually be for that bone and how it responds to treatment. That was 1981 data. You mentioned the change in genetics in pigs. Well, I picked several experiments, and I've just kind of composited all of those into this slide. These again are bones that we've used in different experiments. This is age out to about 4 years of age. Some of the work we've done has dealt with sows through 7 parities. These are quite a few nursery and growing experiments, and again, different bones that we've used. So if we wanted to use percent bone ash to predict that, again, the main point from this is the bone that's selected and the age of the animal would be an important variable to identify rather than having a single number that we can put in a table. That's going to be very difficult for us to do with percent bone ash. Think about what percent bone ash is. The amount of inorganic ash per unit of dry fat-free matrix. It doesn't say how much matrix. It can go up and down. You can increase and decrease the amount of bone without changing that percentage. So we've measured vertebra. Now this is just, again, a couple of points to make with this slide. This is some of the work we've done with vitamin D, looking at kind of the carryover effects of maternal diets. These are, this was with the pigs that we had with kyphosis. At day 0, the red bars, day 25, there was actually a decrease in the percent ash in the vertebral bodies. We were actually interested in looking at the vertebral bodies, so we selected 3 adjacent vertebrae along the entire spinal column. These would represent 7 different regions, 21 vertebrae. You can see again, day 0, fairly straight, about 44% ash, about 36%, 37% ash at day 25. So over the course of that time period, it's not that the ash, the gray bars here, would represent the amount of ash. That actually increased from along the vertebral column, but the organic matter actually increased to a greater extent. So a very rapid growing animal, increase in deposition of the organic matter out of proportion to the amount of mineralization that can occur. Can we solve the problem, Brent, by just simply adding more calcium phosphorus in the diet? I don't think so. Okay, and a pig that's growing that rapid and growing that fast, we're not going to solve the problem by just pushing more calcium and phosphorus into the diet. So again, the same study actually, but looking at 3 different levels of calcium and phosphorus, 3 different levels of vitamin D, 0 supplemental vitamin D, 325 and 1700, and then we followed that during the nursery period. The pigs were fed diets with either 0 international units of vitamin D or 280 international units, and either 95% of the phosphorus requirement or 120% of phosphorus. So very tight control around phosphorus. You mentioned the phosphorus level being important. I think there's probably a stronger connection between vitamin D and phosphorus than there is, in a sense, than vitamin D and calcium. In these pigs, there was actually an increase in the whole body from birth to day 25. So the whole body is acting a little bit different than the vertebral column in this case, but no real effects of dietary supplementation of vitamin D to the maternal diet. These are body contents of the baby pigs. What is interested in this then is the carryover effect that does show up if we feed diets now with 0 supplemental vitamin D to the sow, 325 or 1750, and no supplementation to the baby pig. And this is at day 60 of age, so 60 days of age at the end of the nursery period. Pigs that were fed diets with no supplemental D or 325 had about a 25% reduction in bone mineral density. You would expect that excess calcium and phosphorus should make up for that or help the animal to recover from that. And in this case, we're not able to show that unless the maternal diet had the 1750 international units. The femur from these same pigs, we looked at the ash content. This is the only slide now that will show with any break and strength data, but the ash content of the femur, the pattern, again about a 30% reduction as we saw with the whole body. The yield bending force, the amount of force that it took to break the bone, also about a 30% or 20% reduction, but the stress actually increased. So this is telling us something different. The mechanical test can tell us something different about how the bones responded and how minerals being deposited, but yet it's a very tedious type of procedure to undertake. I think, yeah, I'm going to skip through the slides. It talked about different bones. A couple of points now that I want to make. We've actually looked and evaluated what about market weight pigs. Can we use the foot? Can we use the femur, the foot, to predict the whole body? So we've just completed an experiment in which we've measured DEXA, whole body mineral content, taken the different bones, and then use that to predict the whole body. Well, the femur, again, is probably one of our stronger predictors of the whole body. The fibula, not as good. If we took, these are 40-kilogram pigs down in this weight range. We had 40, 80, and 120-kilogram pigs. If we took the 40-kilogram pigs out, the feet will probably be better, as we predicted in 1980, at the market weight in the market weight pigs. So if we want to develop a standard, and this is the part that would kind of come back to, if we wanted to develop a standard using DEXA scans, which could provide a rapid turnaround time, I've taken data from this study and just plotted the femur bone mineral content versus the bone mineral density. We see kind of a curved response, so they're not depositing, not mineralizing at the same rate, which you might expect. And then I'm actually comparing that in this box to some bones that we were sent from a herd that had been, actually these pigs were subsampled. Often in our studies, if the pig doesn't make it to the slaughter plant, we don't collect the bones from the lame animals. That's a misdiagnosis on our part. So in this case, we collected femurs from pigs that were diagnosed as being lame, and we compare those. If we look at the bone mineral content, the values, and we fit that over this box, it's approximately the same. And these are pigs in our research herd that were fed adequate diets. So these pigs were diagnosed as being lame. So we're not getting a lot of difference. In other words, we're not making a big distinction using the ash content of the bone to distinguish lameness. Okay, the same thing. Now we got a little bit more difference if we use the feet. There's a slight difference in the values from the pig feet that were DEXA scanned that were lame versus the pig feet that we know were fed adequate diets. Again, trying to arrive then at this bone ash and using that, I think is going to be a challenge for us to do. So, take a lesson from my granddaughter, okay? We need to stick to the facts, start early, examine the records, support our co-workers, okay? Kind of rephrase that a little bit. When you're out on the farm, you need the people on the farm really telling you what's going on, not trying to hide what's going on, not trying to mask the story. And we need to share that information freely back and forth to really identify the problems. And that starts from all the way from the formulation of diets through mixing the diets, delivery of the diets, through basically growing the animals and shipping the animals back to the plants. So, conclude then, okay? I told you I'd stay on time. And Jerry told me to take those slides out. I should have done that, Jerry. So accurate measures from bone ash. The bone ash can be rapidly completed with DEXA scans of the whole pig. From a diagnostic standpoint, the individual bones are probably important. The femurs, I'm a little bit biased here, but the femurs are probably better predictors. If you have necrops in a pig, it's probably better to go ahead and collect the femur than to mess with the foot. And I'm leaving the rib out of that. The percent bone ash, though, is not a very sensitive indication of mineral adequacy. So if you want to use bone ash to tell somebody that you need to add more calcium and phosphorus in the diet, it's probably not the best tool that you have. That was my understanding of what I was kind of asked to address. I've done that. I've looked at it. I've struggled with it a bit. I would like to be able to say something different with that it's magic and I can give you the exact answer. But if I stick to the facts and look at the data, I'm going to have to say that bone ash is probably, percent ash especially, is not the best measure to use.